Hello, everyone. I will just add to what Abby said about my background that I used to work in radiation belt physics and now move into a bit of machine learning and space weather. And I think this is relevant to understand why I think the way I think with respect to this topic. So today I'm going to be presenting reproducibility in space science. Do we really need to publish our codes? Before we start, of course, a few things. First, thanks to the organizers for allowing me to present in a completely different topic to what has been seen before, that it's also very subjective in nature. It's not that I gave them like many alternatives, but still, I think they were very encouraging. And so I hope they're not wondering if the presentation is going to be a disaster or not. And second, my intention here is to discuss a problem that I consider will be important in the future. And my intent is to generate some discussion. So if I say something that sounds incorrect to you or that you don't agree with that, I really hope that you let me know at the end, because that's kind of my intention here. And third, and more importantly, I need to make clear that I'm by no means an expert in reproducibility. I'm sure like there may be many of you that have more experience than me. And I would also like to learn from you in this presentation. So while the title is about reproducibility in space science, with this small subtitle, in practice, what motivates me is the other way around. It's, do we really need to publish our code? And that took me to this reproducibility part. And like a short description of my presentation would be a very biased presentation on the topic of differences in working culture between the areas of machine learning, computer science, and space science, and how we may end up having to publish all the code we use in our research, even though it's not helping reproducibility at all, and why I don't like it. So, given said that, why I'm even involved in machine learning, I'm currently part of a project that it's a collaboration between the University of New Hampshire and Alaska, and goes by the name of Harnessing Big Data to Improve Understanding of Predictions and Geomagnetically Induced Currents. We have rebranded ourselves, and we call now the Magician team, which Magician stands for Machine Learning Algorithms for Geomagnetically Induced Currents in Alaska and New Hampshire. A very appropriate name because it's kind of like self-explanatory. So without kind of like destroying what we're doing, and like given that I don't really have time to explain, I'm just saying that we're trying to predict geomagnetically induced currents by using neural networks or other types of machine learning and deep learning. And we are trying to generate predictions from that. So, what motivates me to talk about these things? Well, there's also two things. The first one is about kind of like burning out. It's been a tough year in terms of conferences. All of them have been virtual. And I imagine many of you also have had to present more often than regularly. So when I got this invitation, I thought, well, I want to do something slightly different, hopefully create this discussion. And because like online conference don't really allow for this type of like open discussion. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get it here, but hey, at least let's try. And second, and more importantly, is that like my unhealthy exposure to social media during the past years have led me to seeing a lot of like the following type of exchange, where like some person will tweet something along the lines of, when I receive a manuscript that does not include the source code of the analysis that led to the results, I immediately reject it. I've seen that type of comments from people not in space science. And also I've seen like Reddit sometimes stuff like, why would someone publish a paper and not include the source code? Like I've tried to reproduce the results and I can't get the same scores they get. And then I contacted the authors and they refused to provide like further instructions. And then you go to different sites, Quora and other places, and you see discussions along the lines of what are the advantages of sharing your code of your research, and then definitely why you should do it. So this got me thinking, do we really need to do this? Is this something that really people think about, that you actually need to share your code? And like it's one thing that people talks about this, but then it is something different when journals and editorials start thinking along the same lines, right? And so if you go to Nature, you'll see a few papers in which like authors claim that, well, you should publish your computer code. If you go to Science, there's some guidelines that encourage you to share your code. American Chemical Society also encourage you to share your code. There's a famous paper, like I've seen it all the time, cited, top 10 reasons not to share your code and why you should anyway. Computational biology, they're apparently hardcore on like sharing your code or like publishing your code. In General Plus, this is IEEE, also encourages you to publish your code. Machine learning, intelligent, and nature machine learning. Elsevier, they encourage you to also share your code. But the one thing in common about all these like journals is one keyword that they tend to use very commonly, which is reproducibility. And so even though like the concept of sharing your code can have like many interpretations and many reasons for, there seems to be a trend of thinking that sharing your codes equates or will ensure reproducibility. And well, the problem of reproducibility, I guess, is that there's many different interpretations of what reproducibility is. So if you go to like Fizz.org or like Coursera reproducible research, they actually tell you that they specifically tie reproducibility to reproduce the computational results using the same input data methods, code, and blah, blah, blah. But my idea of reproducibility has always been something different, which is basically that given the same access to data and the methodology used in the analysis, you should be able to obtain results that are consistent with what the authors obtain. And I think that comes from the fact that like when you come from physics, you expect that, well, the physics is the same. You are in the end like getting in touch one other way with the equations, the physics of the system, and you should be able to reproduce the results if they are correct, even if you don't have the code used. If you go to Wikipedia, it goes with like the classic definition of like reproducibility, which also talks about this methodology. And so, but you need to start thinking like, is this the correct definition of reproducibility for our field? And I'm not talking about the reproducibility in the sense of like PhD comments reproducibility, in which like you will have to reproduce things starting from zero because your code doesn't work, the code that somebody gave you doesn't work. I'm more thinking like more broadly on this sense. So it is all like it's everyone going in the direction of this sharing code. Well, not necessarily, and I found one article that like showed me the light that is actually from EOS. So it's kind of like more closer to our field, which tries to share the emphasis on code sharing and move it to methodology. And I think that in the end, when we confront this type of issue that will probably start happening, we'll need to focus on methodology. I'll say I'm guilty of not being very methodological when writing a paper and describing the methodology used, to the point that then even I cannot reproduce exactly what I obtain if I don't go to the original code, because there's always like this step that you properly describe. And I think that this is an interesting discussion to have, because whether code or methodology, we will need to get better. And like the world has been getting better in like making sure that your research is actually reproducible. In this kind of like trying to put things on the balance, I think that there is a cultural clash between machine learning and space science. I think, and like hopefully I'm not wrong, but I think that in the machine learning side, the academic side, there's a culture of publishing the code. There's an association of this code sharing with reproducibility. And this is something that will more likely continue in the future and will more likely influence other areas. And in our side, there's a classic concept of reproducibility with an emphasis on the data and not on the code. The culture of sharing code is almost non-existent, at least from the analysis perspective. You always have like these projects that share code and whatnot. And reproducibility, I think it's our issues are more associated with the lack of an appropriate methodology description. So we will be able to kind of like break this cultural clash. Will machine learning aid the space science in terms of how we approach the problem, or we'll keep doing the things that we have done for many, many years? I'm interested in see what we're going to do. So trying to put these questions in context to open a discussions, what I wanted to know is that this is not about trying to like arguing that you should share code because very good reasons exist, because there are good reasons to share code. This is not about, like, of course, open access projects, open source projects. They're like very important. And this is not even about convincing people to share or not to share code. Stock is more about thinking what changes if codes are required to be published in the future. And like the first thing to ask is, will our science become effectively more reproducible? Will we lose a competitive advantage? Like it or not, your code is kind of like your intellectual property and it gives you an advantage. Whether you see a bigger advantage in sharing it or not, that's something up for discussion. And will this code share requirement be weaponized as it tends to occur with metrics? We know that essentially most metrics used to evaluate like scientific performance have been created kind of like in a non-malignant way, but then they're quickly being adopted as like metrics of success. And like, should we try to push for sharing code with the publications, or should we try to push for like focusing on methodology or even in other things? And I guess I'm going to stop there. And I will leave the questions in the screen in case anyone wants to comment about this. Thank you for listening.